The first time I observed a human, I was struck by how utterly broken they appeared. My name is Kal, Senior Xenobiologist of the Hegemony Science Directorate, and I've studied 78 sapient species across our arm of the galaxy. None have confused me quite like humans. Are you recording this? I asked my assistant, Vreen, as we hovered in our cloaked observation pod above what the humans called Central Park. Rain fell in sheets across the green expanse below, and scattered bipeds hurried along winding paths. All feeds active, Senior, Vreen replied, her photoreceptors dilating with excitement. This was her first field assignment since graduating the academy. Though I'm confused why the director prioritized this species, their technology is primitive. They haven't even achieved unified planetary governance. I gestured with my primary manipulator toward a particular human below. Focus on that specimen, the one carrying the transparent shield. Our sensors zoomed in on a human male clutching what they called an umbrella, rushing along a path as water poured from the sky. His face displayed clear discomfort. They're hydrophobic? Vreen asked, mandibles clicking in surprise. Worse, I said. They're water-soluble. That's impossible for a spacefaring species. Not soluble in the strictest sense, I clarified, but water causes them significant problems. It damages their protective coverings, disrupts their thermal regulation, compromises their dwellings, and introduces countless pathogens into their systems. Even brief exposure to precipitation like this causes marked distress. Vreen's exoskeleton rippled in the hegemony gesture of disbelief. Yet they emerged from an ocean world, precisely why the Council of Elders requested this study. I adjusted our scanners to penetrate the structures around us. Nearly 70% of their world is covered in water, a substance that causes them constant difficulties. Their earliest civilizations formed around water, yet they must continuously protect themselves from it. Below us, the human with the umbrella stumbled, his foot plunging into a puddle. Our audio sensors picked up a distinctive vocalization, what humans call a curse. Their inefficiency is remarkable, Vreen noted. The Pax Collective would categorize them as non-viable. I felt a tinge of annoyance at the mention of the collective. Those crystalline absolutists would dismiss any species that didn't match their rigid standards of evolutionary perfection. The recent expansion of their territory toward hegemony space concerned many on the Council. The Pax see only strength, never potential, I replied. That's precisely why we're here before them. 3 standard cycles ago, our long-range sensors had detected radio signals from this unregistered system. The Council dispatched our research vessel immediately, hoping to establish contact before the Pax Collective or the mercantile Confederation discovered them. New species meant new perspectives, new sciences, perhaps new allies in our increasingly tense sector of the galaxy. Let's move to their commercial district, I instructed. Our pod hummed as it ascended through cloud cover, then descended again over a grid of structures packed with humans. Remarkable, Vreen whispered as we observed the scene below. They're completely exposed to the elements. Humans moved between buildings with minimal protection, their thin outer layers becoming saturated with water. Their transportation devices splashed through accumulated puddles. Their structures leaked. Their electronic devices failed when exposed to the simplest of compounds in the universe. Yet they persist, I said, feeling a peculiar admiration. Their entire civilization exists in defiance of their most abundant natural resource. A design flaw that should have been eliminated through natural selection, Vreen said with the confidence of the recently educated. I was about to correct her simplistic assessment when our pod's alert system activated. Proximity warning, the automated system announced. Unidentified craft approaching. I felt my chromatographers darken with alarm. Classification. Unknown design, energy signature suggests mercantile Confederation technology, but configuration is non-standard. Vreen's appendages fluttered nervously. The Confederation? this far from their territory. Unusual, I agreed, already inputting commands to enhance our cloaking field. The Confederation valued profit above all else, and newly discovered species were highly profitable commodities. If they established first contact, the humans would be at a severe disadvantage in any negotiation. The scanner displayed a sleek vessel entering orbit, definitely Confederation in origin, but modified extensively. A Corsair vessel, then privateers operating with tacit Confederation approval, but without official sanction. They won't detect us, I assured Vreen, though I wasn't entirely confident. Corsairs often possessed technology acquired through less than legal means. Senior, Rian's voice quavered slightly. I'm receiving a transmission directed at our frequency. My primary heart constricted. That's impossible. A voice crackled through our communication system, the harsh, metallic tones of a Bulgarian, likely translated through a Confederation device. Hegemony vessel. Your cloaking signature is detectable to anyone with decent sensors. Identify yourselves immediately, or we will be forced to consider you hostile. I exchanged glances with Vreen. The Vulcarians were a mercenary species, often employed by the Confederation for security. Their presence here complicated matters significantly. This is Senior Xenobiologist Skokkel of the Hegemony Science Directorate. We are conducting non-interventionist observation under Treaty of Galactic Concordance provisions. A harsh sound came through the speaker. A Vulcarian laugh. Treaties apply to recognized systems. Xenobiologist. This planet is unclaimed. The hegemony recognizes their right to self-determination, I replied, invoking our oldest diplomatic principle. How noble, the Vulcarian said. The Confederation recognizes their right to fair market value. We will be establishing contact to discuss appropriate compensation for their system's resources. I felt a surge of anger. The humans are not prepared for first contact, especially with Confederation negotiators. Then I suggest you prepare them quickly, the Voltarian replied. We begin descent in 12 hours. Perhaps we can discuss mutually beneficial arrangements before then. Transmitting coordinates now. The communication ended. Vreen looked at me, her coloration pale with anxiety. What will we do? Contact with pre-unified species violates directorate protocols. I stared at the humans below, still rushing through the rain, still struggling against the water that both sustained and threatened them. We need to inform the Council, I said finally. But first, we need more information about these humans. We've been focused on their weakness, but no species survives to achieve spaceflight without compensating strength. I directed our pod toward what their information networks identified as a research facility. If we were to defend these humans against Confederation exploitation, we needed to understand them better. The building below housed an educational institution they called a university. Our sensors penetrated to reveal humans engaged in countless forms of investigation, studying molecular structures, historical artifacts, mathematical equations, biological samples, all while water continuously threatened their existence from without and within. That's when the realization began to form in my mind. Vreen, I said slowly, modify our physiological scans. I want to examine their neural structure. The results confirmed my suspicion. Humans possessed extraordinarily dense neural networking dedicated to problem-solving and adaptation, far more than evolutionary pressures would predict for their environmental niche. Their water vulnerability, I murmured. It's not their greatest weakness. It might be the source of their greatest strength. I don't understand, Vreen said. I gestured toward the bustling university below. Look at them, constantly innovating, constantly solving problems. Every moment of their existence requires adaptation. Water damages their dwellings, so they build more resilient structures. Water carries diseases, so they develop advanced medicine. Water ruins their possessions, so they create new materials and technologies. I expanded the scan to encompass the city. Their entire civilization is built upon compensating for fundamental design flaws. They don't accept limitations. They overcome them through sheer innovation. You admire them, Rian said, sounding surprised. I'm beginning to. I accessed our ship's database, searching for historical precedents. The Confederation sees them as easy prey, but I suspect they're underestimating these humans, a species that turns disadvantages into catalysts for advancement. That's precisely what the hegemony needs right now. As if to punctuate my statement, an alert flashed on our communications panel. It was a message from the Hegemony Council, Priority 1. The text was brief, but alarming. Pax Collective fleet mobilizing. Intelligence suggests destination is your coordinates. Exercise extreme caution. Diplomatic vessel dispatched. I leaned back, feeling the gravity of our situation. 3 major galactic powers converging on an undiscovered species. This hadn't happened in generations. We need to make contact, I said decisively. Before the Confederation or the Collective, these humans deserve to understand what's coming. Below us, a human scientist looked up from his work, seemingly staring directly at our cloaked pod as rain battered against the windows. For a moment I felt an unexpected connection. 2 researchers, separated by evolutionary gulfs, but united by curiosity. Senior, Vreen said hesitantly, there's something else in these scans you should see. She highlighted a section of data I had overlooked. My primary eyes widened. That can't be right, I whispered. Run the analysis again. Vreen did so, and the results remained unchanged. The human's neural patterns contained structures we had only seen once before, in ancient records from the early days of the hegemony, records of the precursors, the mysterious species that had disappeared millennia ago, leaving only scattered artifacts across the galaxy. I stared at the human scientist below, seeing him with new eyes. What looked like weakness might be something else entirely, something that could change the balance of power in our conflicted galaxy. Rian, I said, my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. Prepare for first contact protocols. The rain continued to fall on the unsuspecting humans below, blissfully unaware that their greatest perceived weakness had just attracted the attention of the entire galaxy. First contact protocols are meticulously designed sequences perfected over centuries of hegemony diplomacy. None of them begin with the words, "Excuse me, but your planet is about to become a galactic flashpoint." Yet, that's precisely what I found myself saying to Dr. Thomas Wells, the human scientist who had sensed our presence despite our cloaking technology. His response, spilling coffee across his laboratory notes and shouting several colorful expletives, was not covered in any diplomatic handbook. "You're not human," he finally managed, eyes wide behind corrective lenses that seemed to magnify his disbelief. "An astute observation," I replied, adjusting my translator. "I am Zex Kal, senior xenobiologist of the Hegemony Science Directorate. This is my assistant, Ring." Ring performed the traditional greeting gesture, her chromatophores rippling through ceremonial patterns. Dr. Wells remained frozen, coffee dripping from his desk onto the floor. "If it helps," I offered, "we're equally surprised by this meeting. Premature contact was not our intention, but circumstances have changed dramatically in the past several hours." "Circumstances," he repeated dumbly, then seemed to gather himself. "Right. Well, would you like to sit down? I'm not sure our chairs will accommodate your physiology." His ability to move past shock into practical considerations impressed me. "We can adapt. Thank you for the courtesy." As we settled into the cramped office, Vreen perching awkwardly on a filing cabinet, I explained our predicament: the Mercantile Confederation's imminent arrival, the Pax Collective's mysterious mobilization, the strange neural patterns that mirrored precursor architecture. Throughout my explanation, Dr. Wells remained remarkably composed, asking intelligent questions and taking notes. "So 3 different alien powers, governments, are all converging on Earth, and none of you intended to contact us yet," he summarized. "Correct?" Your species was meant to develop independently until achieving unified planetary governance. That's standard hegemony protocol, he laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. Well, we'd be waiting a while for that. We can barely agree on climate regulations. Your political fragmentation makes you vulnerable, Vriand interjected. The Confederation exploits such divisions. Dr. Wells nodded slowly. And this Pax Collective? What do they want? I shifted uncomfortably. Unknown, they're expansionists with rigid evolutionary standards. Species that don't meet their criteria for optimization are typically removed from consideration. You mean exterminated, he said flatly. In some cases, yes. But their interest in your system is puzzling. You're far from their territory. A warning chime from our portable scanner interrupted us. Senior, Vreen said urgently, atmospheric disturbance detected. Multiple entry signatures consistent with Pax vessels. Dr. Wells paled visibly. They're already here? I thought we had 12 hours. Those were the Confederation Corsairs, I clarified. This is unexpected. I activated our secure channel to the diplomatic vessel the hegemony had dispatched. Ambassador Tix Lith. This is Senior Xenobiologist 6 Skull. Pax forces have entered Earth atmosphere ahead of schedule. Please advise. The response came through garbled with interference. Diplomatic approach. Neutrality zone. Request emergency council session. Then silence. What happened? Dr. Wells asked. Communications disruption, Vrian reported, her voice tight with concern, consistent with Pax suppression field technology. I felt my secondary heart accelerate. They're isolating the system. Standard conquest procedure. To my surprise, Dr. Wells didn't panic. Instead, he pulled out a communication device. I need to alert our authorities. Whatever their flaws, they should know we're about to have company. Your primitive transmission systems will be ineffective under a Pax suppression field, Rian said not unkindly. The human smiled thinly. Watch me. He dismantled his device with surprising speed, rewiring components and attaching what appeared to be a crystal oscillator from his laboratory equipment. Quantum entanglement isn't affected by conventional signal disruption. This is a prototype, but it should punch through. I exchanged glances with Vrian. This technology was theoretically possible but practically difficult, yet the human worked with confident precision, seemingly unconcerned by the water still dripping from his rain-soaked clothing onto sensitive components. There, he said, activating the modified device. Message sent to multiple military and scientific installations. Now, tell me what these Pax ships are likely to do first. Before I could answer, the sky outside darkened. Not with clouds, but with the massive shadow of a Pax dreadnought descending through the atmosphere. The legendary collective flagship evolutionary imperative was unmistakable even at this distance, a crystalline structure of impossible angles and pulsing energy fields. That, I said quietly, is Supreme Arbiter Nixthul's personal vessel, the highest authority in the collective. Important fellow, Dr. Wells asked, remarkably composed given the circumstances. Important enough that her presence here violates 17 different neutrality treaties, I replied. The Hegemony Council will be displeased. As fascinating as interstellar politics sounds, Dr. Wells said, gathering equipment into a waterproof bag, I suggest we move somewhere less exposed. My colleagues are evacuating the building per my message, but military response teams will be converging here soon. His pragmatism continued to impress me. Agreed. Our observation pod can transport us to a safer location. As we made our way to the roof where our pod was docked, the first sounds of chaos reached us. Sirens shouting, the distant thump of military aircraft. Humans, it seemed, responded to crisis with immediate mobilization despite their political differences. Atmospheric defense systems activated in multiple nations, Breen reported as we reached the pod. Primitive, but creative in their deployment. Dr. Wells smiled grimly. We've been preparing for alien invasion since before we had airplanes. Thousands of fictional scenarios, war games, contingency plans. Paranoia has its advantages. We boarded the pod just as the first Pax scouts began deploying across the city, crystalline orbs that hummed with ominous energy. We should return to our ship, Brian suggested. Negative, I countered. We need to understand the collective's intentions, set course for their deployment center. That's insane, Dr. Wells objected. We should be getting as far away as possible. Knowledge is our only advantage, I explained. The hegemony needs to know why the collective is violating fundamental protocols, and you need to understand what you're facing. Reluctantly, he agreed. Our pod slipped through the increasingly crowded airspace, its advanced cloaking keeping us hidden from both human defenses and Pax scouts. What we discovered at their deployment center, Central Park, ironically, chilled even my exotic biology. Supreme Arbiter Nixthal had established a command post at the park's center, her crystalline form towering over subordinates and scanning equipment, but it wasn't her presence that concerned me. It was the device being assembled nearby, atmospheric processor, I whispered, planet scale. What does it do? Dr. Wells asked. It modifies atmospheric composition. The collective uses them to optimize conquered worlds for their preferred conditions. His expression darkened. And what are their preferred conditions? Dry. Very dry. Atmospheric humidity below 7%. I watched the implications sink in. The collective wasn't just invading, they were planning to transform Earth's fundamental environment, to remove the very water that humans simultaneously struggled against and depended upon. We need to get to your leaders, I said urgently. This goes beyond conquest. It's existential. Our pod rocketed toward what Dr. Wells identified as a military command center, where his quantum entanglement message had triggered an emergency response. As we traveled, we monitored communications between the arriving Confederation Corsairs and the Pax forces. This territory is claimed under Confederation Charter, the Vulcarian captain declared. Your presence violates commercial rights established. Supreme Arbiter Nixthal's response was coldly dismissive. The collective does not recognize resource claims on evolutionary correction targets. Your presence is noted and tolerated only until our work begins. Evolutionary correction targets? Dr. Wells asked, his voice tight. A designation I've never seen applied to inhabited worlds, I admitted. It implies they see your species as a developmental aberration rather than a conquest objective. Charming. We arrived at the military facility to find it already in diplomatic chaos. The hegemony delegation had managed to land despite the suppression field, and Ambassador Teeksleth was attempting to mediate between human military officials, Confederation representatives, and the Pax Collective's advanced diplomatic corps. Cannot begin atmospheric modification without council approval, the ambassador was saying as we entered. The Treaty of Galactic Concordance explicitly. The treaty does not apply to correction scenarios, the Pax diplomat interrupted. The human mural architecture shows clear signs of precursor contamination. This is containment, not conquest. The human general, a stern-faced woman with short gray hair, looked between the aliens with remarkable composure. While you debate interstellar law, let me be clear. Any attempt to modify Earth's atmosphere will be met with maximum resistance. The Confederation representative, a sleek, furred being with calculating eyes, leaned forward. Perhaps a more productive approach would be to discuss compensation packages for limited atmospheric adjustment. The Confederation could offer relocation services for affected populations at very reasonable rates. Dr. Wells stepped forward before I could stop him. You're all missing the point, he announced to the startled gathering. Dr. Wells, the general acknowledged with a nod. I received your alert. These are our visitors. Some of them, he replied, then turned to the Pax diplomat. You believe our neural patterns show precursor influence. What exactly does that mean? The crystalline being vibrated with obvious distaste. Precursor neural architecture creates unpredictable evolutionary paths. Your species' irrational persistence, despite fundamental biological incompatibility with your environment, demonstrates the pattern. You should not exist, yet you do. A clear sign of contamination, because we've adapted to water despite being damaged by it, Dr. Wells asked. Precisely. It is unnatural, inefficient, a sign of external manipulation. Dr. Wells glanced at me, then at the assembled diplomats. With respect, that's backward. Our relationship with water isn't a design flaw. It's the driving force behind our development. He activated a projection system displaying human history in rapid succession: early water management systems, irrigation dams, waterproofing technologies, medical advances to combat waterborne diseases. We don't just survive despite water. We thrive because of the challenges it presents. Every problem it creates forces innovation. Without that constant pressure, we might never have developed our problem-solving capacity. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Pax diplomat vibrated with increasing agitation. Irrelevant. The correction protocols have been initiated. Then you should know, Dr. Wells continued calmly, that we've already deployed countermeasures to your atmospheric processors. Impossible, the Pax diplomat scoffed. Your technology is primitive. Dr. Wells smiled. Our technology, yes, but our water, that's complex stuff. Your crystalline processors are currently being subjected to something we call acid rain, precipitation with industrial pollutants that's particularly corrosive to certain mineral structures, like, living crystal. Alarms began sounding from the Pax diplomat's communication device. The crystalline being's structure clouded with distress. This is an act of war. No, the human general interjected. It's rain, something we've been dealing with our entire existence. Perhaps you should have checked the weather forecast before invading. The Confederation representative's whiskers twitched with barely suppressed amusement. It seems the humans are not as defenseless as initial assessments suggested. Ambassador Kezalith seized the diplomatic opening. I propose an immediate cessation of hostilities and establishment of a neutral dialogue zone. The hegemony will guarantee safe passage for all parties. Before anyone could respond, a deafening crack split the air. Through the command center windows, we watched in horror as the massive Pax dreadnought fired upon a formation of human aircraft. The sky ignited with energy discharges and explosions. So much for diplomacy, Dr. Wells murmured. Supreme Arbiter Nixthol's voice echoed through all communication channels, overriding the suppression field through sheer power. The contamination is more advanced than anticipated. Escalation to purification protocol authorized. All collective vessels commence atmospheric sterilization. I turned to Dr. Wells, seeing my own concern reflected in his expression. I believe, I said quietly, we may have underestimated the collective's devotion to evolutionary purity. And they, he replied, watching as human defense systems activated worldwide, have underestimated our devotion to surviving whatever the universe throws at us, especially water, or its absence. Around us, representatives of 3 galactic powers and 1 remarkably resilient planet, prepared for a conflict that would reshape the political landscape of our sector. And somewhere in the chaos, I couldn't help but wonder if the precursors, or whatever had influenced human evolution, had anticipated this moment. The storm was just beginning, and unlike the rain these humans had adapted to face, this deluge would not be so easily weathered. War arrives with terrifying efficiency when waged by species who have perfected it across thousands of worlds. 3 hours after Supreme Arbiter Nixthal authorized purification protocol, 37 major human cities were under direct assault. Crystalline structures, what humans were calling dehydration towers, had been deployed across every continent, creating expanding zones of absolute aridity. Within these zones, all moisture was systematically extracted from the environment, from the air, from the soil, and from any living organism. I had witnessed 17 interspecies conflicts during my career with the hegemony. None had escalated with such ruthless speed. "We need to evacuate the remaining civilians," General Harlow ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding on the command center's monitoring systems. "Focus resources on the coastal shelters." Dr. Wells looked up from the atmospheric readings he'd been studying. "The towers are concentrating on population centers. They're prioritizing human targets over environmental transformation." "Efficient," I noted grimly. "The collective rarely wastes energy." The general's expression hardened. "We've lost contact with Boston, Miami, and most of Chicago. Satellite imagery shows they're completely encased in some kind of crystalline structures. Stasis fields," Ambassador Tisleth explained. "The collective preserves samples of species it deems evolutionarily significant. Your cities are becoming living museums." Dr. Wells slammed his fist on the console. "They're not specimens. There are 8 million people in Chicago alone. 27 million globally at current count," Brian reported quietly, monitoring the hegemony's orbital sensors. "The collective appears to be following standard cataloging procedures." I had never seen such raw emotion on a human face before. Dr. Wells looked physically ill as the implications sank in. Yet beneath the horror, I detected something unexpected: calculation. "General," he said abruptly, "what's our current deployment of SOFAR devices?" The general frowned. "The underwater acoustic network, it's primarily for submarine communications, not defense. But it's still operational, even with the Pax suppression fields. Yes, sound propagation in deep water channels is unaffected by their technology, but I don't see how. We need to transmit specific harmonic sequences through the Sci-Fi network." Dr. Wells interrupted. "The crystalline structures the Pax use, they're vulnerable to sympathetic vibration." I stared at him in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" He gestured to the samples we'd been analyzing. "Their material composition is remarkably similar to certain piezoelectric crystals we've studied. If we can generate the right frequencies through global ocean channels, the vibrations would propagate through Earth's crust," I realized, "potentially destabilizing their structures worldwide." General Harlow was already issuing orders. "Redirect all submarine assets to acoustic transmission stations." "Dr. Wells, I need those frequency calculations immediately." As the command center erupted into activity, Ambassador Chipsedloth drew me aside. "This strategy is unorthodox." "Humans appear to specialize in unorthodox," I replied, watching Dr. Wells work with remarkable speed despite the apocalyptic scenarios unfolding on monitors around him. "The Hegemony Council is concerned," the ambassador continued. "Confederation forces are positioning for opportunistic resource extraction once the collective finishes their work, and the Pax Supreme Arbiter has rejected all diplomatic overtures." "So we do nothing?" I demanded, my chromatophores darkening with anger. "We observe and prepare contingencies." The ambassador's tone softened. "The Council believes these humans warrant further study, regardless of the outcome." Before I could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. On the central monitor, a massive energy signature bloomed over the Atlantic Ocean. "What is that?" Reen asked, her voice tight with concern. General Harlow's face went ashen. "They've targeted the SOFAR transmission network. That was our Norfolk underwater acoustic facility." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The humans' countermeasure had been anticipated and neutralized before it could be deployed. "Casualties?" Dr. Wells asked quietly. "The facility housed 4,000 naval personnel and their families," the general replied, "plus the surrounding city of 300,000. I expected despair, capitulation. It would have been the rational response. Instead, I witnessed something extraordinary." Dr. Wells straightened, his expression hardening into resolved determination. "We need to adjust our approach. If underwater acoustics are compromised, we'll use the atmosphere itself as a transmission medium. That's not possible, Vreen objected. Atmospheric propagation cannot generate the necessary harmonic stability. Not under normal conditions, Dr. Wells agreed. But what about during a hurricane? The general's eyes widened. The Category 5 system. Approaching the eastern seaboard. Precisely. The Pax might understand our technology, but they don't understand our planet. Hurricane Miranda will create unique atmospheric conditions, pressure differentials, moisture patterns, and wind velocities that we can weaponize. I watched in fascination as the humans immediately began recalibrating their defense systems. No debate about whether it was possible. No crisis of confidence after a devastating loss. Just immediate adaptation to changing circumstances. Similar reports flooded in from around the globe. In the Asian subcontinent, humans were using monsoon conditions to disrupt Pax crystallization processes. Across the Pacific, they deployed underwater volcanic vents to create steam barriers around island nations. In drought-stricken regions, they were setting controlled wildfires to generate thermal updrafts that destabilized Pax atmospheric operations. They're using every environmental hardship as a weapon, Reen observed, wonder evident in her voice. No, I corrected, finally understanding what I was witnessing. They're using their adaptations to environmental hardships as weapons. The very mechanisms they developed to survive their water-dominated world are now their greatest defense. A communication alert interrupted our observation. It was from the mercantile Confederation flagship that had been maintaining a strategic distance from the conflict. Hegemony vessel, the Vulcarian captain's gravelly voice announced. We're detecting unusual energy patterns in the human resistance. Our analysts believe they're employing precursor derivative technologies. Ambassador Tixlith responded cautiously. The hegemony has reached no conclusions regarding precursor influence. Perhaps you should observe more closely, the Vulcarian suggested, particularly their neural responses to crisis. The pattern recognition architecture is distinctive. The transmission ended, leaving us with troubling implications. The Confederation rarely shared intelligence without ulterior motives. They're trying to confirm their suspicions, the ambassador mused. If humans truly possess precursor neural architecture, the Confederation would consider them immensely valuable, marketable, and the collective would consider them an existential threat to evolutionary purity, I added. As night fell over the command center, I requested permission to observe human emergency response efforts firsthand. General Harlow assigned me a security detail, and we ventured into the chaos of Washington, D.C. What I witnessed changed my understanding of resilience forever. The Pax dehydration tower at the city's center had created a 2-mile radius of absolute aridity. At the perimeter of this zone, humans had established a series of relief stations, medical tents, water distribution points, emergency shelters. Despite losing their homes, despite watching their city literally crystallize before their eyes, they worked with remarkable coordination. I observed a human medical worker treating victims of extreme dehydration. Her own lips were cracked from thirst, her skin reddened from exposure, yet she moved with precise efficiency. "Shouldn't you rest?" I asked, after identifying myself as an allied observer. She glanced up, momentarily startled by my non-human appearance before focusing on her work again. "There'll be time for rest when everyone's stable. Your dedication is admirable, but physiologically unsustainable," I noted. She smiled thinly. That's what everyone told the first responders at Chernobyl, and the firefighters during the California mega-fires, and the medical workers during the pandemic. She administered an intravenous solution to an unconscious patient. Humans do physiologically unsustainable pretty well when we need to. I followed her through the treatment center, watching humans push far beyond rational physical limits. They operated in crisis mode with practiced familiarity, as if disaster response were a natural state rather than an extraordinary circumstance. "You've done this before," I realized aloud. Not alien crystallization specifically, she replied with unexpected humor. But crisis? Catastrophe? Certainly. Every hurricane, every earthquake, every flood, every drought. We're a species that lives on the edge of disaster all the time. The truth of her words struck me with surprising force. Humans existed in a constant state of environmental adversity. Water too much, too little, too polluted, too powerful, had shaped their entire developmental history. They hadn't just adapted to crisis. They had evolved to excel during it. As I prepared to return to the command center, an incoming transmission from Vreen redirected me to a nearby research facility. There I found Dr. Wells and a team of scientists working feverishly around what appeared to be primitive terraforming equipment. "Ah, senior xenobiologist," he greeted me, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion but alert. "Perfect timing. We could use your expertise." "What are you attempting?" I asked, examining their apparatus. "Something completely insane," he admitted with a wry smile. "We're modifying agricultural irrigation drones to deliver a specialized payload." I inspected the substance being loaded into the devices, a grayish liquid with unusual properties. "This is not water." "No, it's a hyperhydration compound originally developed for drought relief. We've modified it to specifically target crystalline structures. You created this in hours." I couldn't hide my astonishment. "We repurposed it," he corrected. "That's humanity's real superpower, Zekagal. We don't just solve problems, we cannibalize our solutions to create new ones." As if to underscore his point, a young scientist approached with a modified communication device. "The quantum entanglement network is online. All surviving research facilities are coordinating deployment." Dr. Wells nodded. "Good. We launch at dawn, coordinated with Hurricane Miranda's landfall." I studied their operational plan with growing appreciation for its audacity. The humans intended to use the hurricane's massive, moisture-laden system as both cover and delivery mechanism for their countermeasure. The irrigation drones, technology developed to combat drought, would be carried by the storm's powerful winds directly into Pax-controlled airspace. "The Collective will detect this approach," I warned. "Counting on it," Dr. Wells replied. "They'll focus their defenses on the obvious threat, the hurricane and our drones. Meanwhile," he gestured to a separate set of monitors showing oceanic movements. With a shock, I realized humans had repurposed underwater mining equipment to approach the submerged portions of the crystalline structures. "A diversionary tactic," I said, impressed, despite my concerns. "But even if successful, this addresses only Earth-based Pax forces. Their orbital fleet remains untouched." Dr. Wells exchanged glances with his colleagues, and I detected something unexpected in their expressions, not desperation, but anticipation. "About that," he said, "we've been analyzing the communication patterns between Pax ground structures and their fleet. Their crystalline technology requires precise harmonic synchronization." Understanding dawned. "You're going to disrupt their entire command network." "Not disrupt," he corrected. "Repurpose. If our calculations are correct, we can use their own communication harmonic to transmit a very specific sequence." One of his colleagues pulled up a molecular diagram that I recognized immediately. "Hydrogen bonding patterns," I whispered. "You're going to transmit the molecular structure of water through their network. Their entire system is designed to identify and neutralize water molecules," Dr. Wells explained. "We're going to overwhelm it with contradictory instructions, telling it to both attack and preserve the same molecular structure." The sheer audacity stunned me. "You're attempting to create a logic paradox in a system you barely understand." "We understand paradox very well," Dr. Wells replied quietly. "Humans live in paradox. Water gives us life and takes it away. Our greatest cities are built in flood zones and earthquake zones. We fight wars over resources we then destroy. Contradiction is our natural habitat." As dawn approached, I observed final preparations for what humans had designated Operation Cloudburst. Across the planet, survivors of Pax attacks, coordinated with military and scientific teams, preparing for a counteroffensive, unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Collective, with its rigid evolutionary standards and crystal-perfect logic, had categorized humans as an aberration, a species that irrationally persisted despite fundamental incompatibility with its environment. What they failed to understand was that this very incompatibility had created a species uniquely equipped to face their onslaught. As Hurricane Miranda's massive cloud wall approached the eastern seaboard, I transmitted my observations to the Hegemony Council. Humans appear to possess an evolutionary adaptation previously unclassified in xenobiological records. Their neural architecture enables accelerated adaptation under crisis conditions, not merely surviving catastrophe, but weaponizing the adaptation process itself. Recommendation: immediate reclassification as crisis-evolved sentience, with potential precursor influence requiring further investigation. Immediate diplomatic intervention strongly advised. I ended my transmission just as the first rainbow appeared over Washington, an atmospheric phenomenon caused by light refracting through water droplets. To the Pax Collective, it would be an aberration, a sign of molecular disorder. To humans, it had always been a symbol of hope after devastation, which, I was beginning to understand, might be the most remarkable human adaptation of all. Operation Cloudburst began not with a declaration or ultimatum, but with a simple meteorological event: rain. As Hurricane Miranda made landfall, I stood with Dr. Wells on the roof of the research facility, watching sheets of water cascade from skies that had been crystalline clear just hours before. The contrast was striking. The Pax Collective's perfect, desiccated order now assaulted by Earth's chaotic, primordial element. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Wells murmured, his face turned upward despite the deluge soaking him. "Most species see a storm as something to avoid. We see it as relief, renewal." Around us, the hyperhydration deployment drones lifted off in synchronized waves, their small forms quickly disappearing into the storm's violent updrafts. Atmospheric sensors showed them dispersing precisely according to plan, carrying their specialized payloads toward Pax structures. "First contact with Pax defenses in 30 seconds, reported a technician through our communications link. I expected immediate countermeasures, energy barriers, interceptor drones, atmospheric disruption fields. The Collective's technological superiority was indisputable, their tactical systems refined across countless conflicts. Instead, something unprecedented occurred. Nothing. No defensive response detected. The technician confirmed, confusion evident in her voice. Dr. Wells smiled, a sharp expression that contained no warmth. "They don't consider water weapons a serious threat. Their entire evolutionary paradigm dismisses our primary environmental challenge as irrelevant." "Tactical arrogance," I observed. "A significant vulnerability." "One we've encountered before," he replied. "Throughout our history, technologically superior forces have dismissed indigenous knowledge of local environments. It rarely ends well for the invaders." The first hyperhydration drones reached their targets, the crystalline dehydration towers that had turned vast urban areas into desiccated wastelands. As they released their payloads, the compound interacted with the tower surfaces in mesmerizing patterns, spreading like living quicksilver across the alien structures. Molecular disruption confirmed at all primary targets, the technician reported, excitement breaking through her professional demeanor. Crystalline integrity compromised by 17% and accelerating. On monitoring screens, we watched the towers begin to cloud, their perfect transparency marred by spreading opacities. The hyperhydration compound wasn't merely coating the structures, it was being absorbed into them, disrupting their molecular lattice from within. "Phase 1 successful," Dr. Wells announced. "Initiating Phase 2. Throughout Washington, modified fire hydrants suddenly activated, sending pressurized streams not of water, but of the same hyperhydration compound into storm drains and sewer systems. Similar deployments occurred in surviving cities worldwide, utilizing infrastructure designed to manage flooding to deliver a precise counterstrike. The underground approach, I realized. Your diversionary tactic was the obvious aerial deployment. The Pax analyze everything from a position of assumed superiority, Dr. Wells explained. They look for threats coming at them, not from beneath them. Below the crystalline structures, the compound began infiltrating their foundation matrices. On our monitors, subterranean sensors showed the disruption spreading upward through molecular channels, compromising entire towers from foundation to apex. Then came the first Pax response, a devastating one. Energy surge detected in Pax orbital fleet, the technician warned. Their target. The rest of her warning was lost as the world around us flashed brilliant white. When my vision cleared, I saw a massive crater where a significant portion of Northern Virginia had been. Direct kinetic strike, Dr. Wells stated flatly, though I could detect the horror beneath his clinical assessment. They've switched to orbital bombardment. General Harlow's voice came through our communications, tight with controlled fury. All units initiate Hydra protocol immediately. I repeat, Hydra protocol is now active. I turned to Dr. Wells. What is Hydra protocol? Something we hoped wouldn't be necessary, he replied grimly. When you cut off one head, two more take its place. Across our monitors, thousands of smaller deployment signatures suddenly appeared, not from military bases or research facilities, but from civilian locations, farms, schools, residential neighborhoods, private vehicles. You distributed your countermeasure technology to civilians? I asked, astonished. We distributed the knowledge, he corrected. The specific formulations, deployment methods, targeting frequencies, all decentralized. If they destroy one deployment center, a dozen others activate. The strategy was as brilliant as it was desperate. The Pax could target military installations and government facilities, but they couldn't possibly strike every point of resistance without effectively sterilizing the entire planet, which would defeat their purpose of preserving human specimens for evolutionary study. Second kinetic strike detected, the technician reported. Target is Chicago Collection Zone. Dr. Wells looked up sharply. They're targeting their own structures? Confirmed. They appear to be destroying compromised collection zones rather than risk contamination. The implications were staggering. The collective was sacrificing their carefully preserved human specimens rather than risk the spread of the hyperhydration compound. Millions of captured humans destroyed by their own captors. They're retreating from water-compromised areas worldwide, the technician continued, consolidating forces in arid regions only. Dr. Wells's expression darkened. They're adapting their strategy, focusing on environments where their desiccation advantage is strongest. Desert warfare, General Harlow's voice cut in. Fortunately, we have specialists for that, too. On our strategic displays, I watched human military forces converging on the newly established Pax strongholds in Earth's desert regions, the Sahara, the Arabian Peninsula, the Australian outback, the American Southwest. Unlike conventional forces, these units moved in small, rapid groups, utilizing what appeared to be primitive equipment alongside advanced technology. Indigenous desert warfare units, Dr. Wells explained, noting my interest. People who've spent centuries adapting to extreme water scarcity, Bedouin, Tuareg, Aboriginal, Navajo specialists combined with modern special forces. I watched in fascination as these units employed tactics that seemed counterintuitive, traveling during the hottest parts of the day, using the very conditions that favored the Pax against them by exploiting the difference between human adaptation and Pax expectation. The collective assumes control of arid environments, gives them tactical superiority, Dr. Wells continued. But humans have been surviving deserts since before we built cities. We don't just endure water scarcity, we've developed entire cultures around it. Even more remarkable was the deployment of specialized drones that mimicked Earth's desert creatures, scorpions, snakes, jackrabbits, each carrying microscopic amounts of the hyperhydration compound directly into Pax command structures, technology inspired by the very evolutionary adaptations the collective considered inferior. "We're receiving a transmission from the Pax flagship," the technician announced. System-wide broadcast. Supreme Arbiter Nixthol's crystalline visage appeared on our monitors, its usually perfect facets now showing concerning fracture patterns. "Humans of Earth," the Supreme Arbiter's artificially translated voice announced. "Your resistance exceeds predicted parameters. This confirms precursor contamination of your evolutionary path. The collective now elevates your categorization to existential aberration status." Dr. Wells frowned. "That doesn't sound like surrender," the Supreme Arbiter continued. "Purification protocol has been upgraded to quarantine protocol. Your solar system will be isolated to prevent further evolutionary contamination. All collective assets are now authorized to employ final dissolution measures." The transmission ended abruptly. "What are final dissolution measures?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Nothing good," Dr. Wells replied grimly. He was right. Within minutes, our sensors detected massive energy buildups throughout the Pax fleet. Not targeted weapons, but something far more concerning: reality anchors being systematically disabled. "They're preparing to collapse local space-time," I realized with horror. "A dimensional fold that would remove Earth from normal space entirely." Dr. Wells looked unexpectedly calm. "They're really determined to avoid getting wet, aren't they?" Before I could respond to his incongruous humor, alarms blared throughout the facility. On our displays, the Hegemony diplomatic vessel suddenly appeared from hyperspace, bearing significant battle damage. "Ambassador Texlith is requesting emergency teleconference," the technician reported. The ambassador's image appeared, the normally composed diplomat now visibly agitated. "The collective has declared Earth a precursor contamination zone. They've requested Confederation and Hegemony evacuation of all assets within the solar system. They're going to erase Earth from existence," Dr. Wells stated flatly. "Worse," the ambassador replied. "They intend to create a permanent, dimensional exclusion zone. No entry, no exit, no communication. Your entire solar system would become a bubble of quarantine space-time." I expected despair or panic from the humans. Instead, Dr. Wells exchanged meaningful glances with General Harlow's image on another screen. "How long until the dimensional fold begins?" he asked. "Their systems require precise calibration, approximately 6 hours. "That's enough time," General Harlow stated. "Initiate Lazarus protocol." The next hours were a blur of activity that defied all my expectations of a species facing existential annihilation. Rather than breaking under pressure, humans seemed to achieve an almost crystalline clarity of purpose, ironically mirroring the very collective structures they fought against. What I witnessed wasn't panic, but coordinated action on a planetary scale. Research teams working in parallel to modify the hyperhydration compound, military units reconfiguring orbital delivery systems, civilian engineers repurposing everything from irrigation equipment to beverage dispensers. "You anticipated even this scenario?" I asked Dr. Wells as we hurried toward what humans called NASA headquarters. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but we've been imagining our own extinction since we understood the concept. Every planetary disaster film, every apocalyptic novel, every doomsday cult, they've all been rehearsals for this moment. At NASA, we found a scene of controlled chaos. Scientists and engineers worked on what appeared to be a radical modification of existing satellite systems. The Lazarus protocol is our final contingency," Dr. Wells explained. "If Earth itself is threatened, we deploy a molecular disruptor designed specifically to target crystalline structures at their fundamental frequency. But the Pax fleet is well beyond your atmospheric range," I pointed out. He smiled thinly. "We're not targeting their fleet. We're targeting the moon." I stared at him in disbelief. "Your natural satellite? What possible strategic value?" "Silicon dioxide," he interrupted. Quartz crystal is one of the moon's primary components. If we can trigger a cascading molecular disruption of its crystalline structures using the hyperhydration compound, the implication struck me with stunning force. You would create a debris field of unprecedented proportions. Precisely. The Pax fleet would be forced to divert significant energy from their dimensional fold to protect their crystalline vessels. Even if successful, this would cause catastrophic damage to Earth's natural systems, I warned. Tidal disruptions, meteorological chaos. Water is adaptable, he replied simply. So are we. As the crucial moment approached, I found myself standing beside Dr. Wells in NASA's control center, watching final preparations for what might be humanity's last act of defiance. The modified satellites had been positioned in optimal lunar trajectories, each carrying concentrated hyperhydration charges, Pax dimensional anchors at 70% calibration, a technician reported, point of no return in approximately 20 minutes. Dr. Wells took a deep breath. Initiate Lazarus countdown. On our screens, a communication alert suddenly flashed. Incoming transmission from the Confederation flagship, the technician announced. The Vulcarian captain's gravelly voice filled the control room. Attention, human authorities. Confederation sensors detect preparations for large-scale lunar disruption. We strongly advise against this action. Noted, General Harlow responded coolly. Any alternative suggestions for preventing our dimensional erasure would be welcome. A pause. The Confederation proposes an alternative solution. Our analysis confirms precursor neural patterns in human cognitive architecture. This makes your species a valuable commodity, one we are prepared to protect as an investment. You're offering to fight the collective? Dr. Wells asked skeptically. We're offering to claim humans as a protected resource under Confederation Charter. This would trigger automatic arbitration by the Galactic Council. Ambassador Chistisleth's voice joined the conversation. The hegemony would support such arbitration. It would force a minimum 20-cycle deliberation period, during which no dimensional manipulation would be permitted. I watched indecision cross Dr. Wells's face for perhaps the first time since I'd met him. And in exchange, exclusive negotiation rights for human cognitive analysis, the Vulcarian stated bluntly. Your species' problem-solving architecture has significant market value. You want to study our brains, Dr. Wells translated, among other opportunities for mutual benefit. The control room fell silent as humans exchanged glances. I could almost see the calculations occurring behind their eyes, weighing immediate survival against long-term autonomy, measuring known dangers against unknown exploitation. Pax dimensional anchors at 85%. The technician warned. Decision required immediately. Dr. Wells turned to General Harlow's image. Your call, General. Her expression was granite. Launch Lazarus. If the Confederation wants to protect their investment, they can help us fight. Lazarus protocol initiated. The technician confirmed, pressing the activation sequence. The modified satellites released their payloads precisely as designed, sending concentrated hyperhydration charges into carefully calculated lunar impact zones. On our monitors, we watched the charges detonate against the moon's surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a spiderweb of luminous blue lines began spreading across the lunar surface, visible even from Earth. The hyperhydration compound was infiltrating the moon's crystalline structures, disrupting molecular bonds that had remained stable for billions of years. Lunar structural integrity compromised. The technician reported, voice tight with awe. Cascading disruption exceeding predictions by 300%. What happened next occurred with a silence that belied its cataclysmic nature. From our perspective on Earth, the moon appeared to develop a blue luminescence that grew steadily brighter. Then, horrifyingly visibly, it began to fragment, not explosively, but in an almost gentle disaggregation like sugar dissolving in water. The Pax fleet, caught in the approaching debris field, reacted with frantic energy discharges. Their vessels, perfect crystalline structures themselves, were uniquely vulnerable to the hyperhydration-infused lunar fragments. Multiple Pax vessels compromised, the technician reported, dimensional fold preparation disrupted. On our screens, we watched Pax ships frantically attempting to establish defensive perimeters. Some succeeded. Others, struck by even small lunar fragments, began exhibiting the same dissolving effect, now consuming portions of the moon. "They're retreating," someone announced as the surviving Pax vessels began accelerating away from Earth. But the Supreme Arbiter's flagship remained, stubbornly maintaining position despite the approaching debris field. A transmission cut through all channels. "Humans." Supreme Arbiter Nixthal's voice resonated with cold fury. "You have confirmed your precursor contamination beyond doubt. No natural species would sacrifice its own celestial anchor for tactical advantage. This level of adaptation is aberrant." Dr. Wells leaned toward the transmission pickup. "Says the species running from rain. Your resistance is notable but ultimately futile," the Supreme Arbiter continued. "Even now, the Collective dispatches our purification fleet. What you face today is merely our scientific expedition." I felt my chromatophores pale at this information. The Collective's purification fleet was legendary, a force reserved for only the most severe evolutionary threats. Yet, Dr. Wells remained eerily calm. "You might want to check your long-range sensors, Arbiter. I believe you have more immediate concerns." On our strategic displays, new signatures appeared. Confederation warships decloaking in attack formation around the Pax flagship. The Collective vessel evolutionary imperative is hereby claimed as a salvage opportunity under Confederation charter, the Vulcarian captain announced. "Surrender and prepare for boarding or be designated a derelict resource." The Supreme Arbiter's response was immediate and devastating. The flagship's weapons systems activated, sending crystalline energy beams through 3 Confederation vessels before they could raise defenses. What followed was a space battle of awesome destructive power. Pax's crystalline weapons against Confederation phase cannons, while lunar debris continued to spread throughout near-Earth orbit. The sheer violence of the confrontation was visible from the planet's surface as flashes of light brighter than any natural phenomenon. "We need to prepare for potential orbital bombardment," General Harlow warned. "If the Arbiter decides Earth can't be quarantined, they may attempt sterilization instead." Dr. Wells nodded grimly. "Deploy the atmospheric shield prototypes." I turned to him in surprise. "You have planetary shields." "Not exactly," he admitted. "But we have thousands of weather modification drones designed to seed clouds with ice crystals. If we deploy them with hyperhydration compound instead, you'd create a molecular disruption field in the upper atmosphere," I realized. "Any crystalline weapons fire would be dispersed before reaching the surface." "That's the theory," he agreed. "We've never had occasion to test it against alien doomsday weapons before." As the atmospheric defense system deployed, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary adaptability of this species. In mere days, they had repurposed irrigation equipment into weapons, weather control systems into planetary shields, and geological knowledge into space-based countermeasures. The Pax had dismissed humans as an evolutionary aberration because they struggled with water. What the Collective failed to understand was that this very struggle had created a species uniquely equipped to face existential threats with improvisational brilliance. Above us, the battle reached its crescendo as the Supreme Arbiter's flagship, now visibly compromised by lunar debris impacts, executed a desperate maneuver, a direct attack run toward Earth's atmosphere. "They're going to attempt atmospheric entry," the technician reported. "Impact trajectory suggests Washington, D.C." Dr. Wells' expression remained calm despite the imminent threat. "Hyperhydration field at maximum density. If they enter our atmosphere, their entire vessel will experience molecular breakdown." "They know that," I realized. "This is not tactical. It's spite." On our screens, we watched the massive Pax flagship descending, its crystalline structure already showing signs of stress from both battle damage and encroaching lunar debris. Confederation ships pursued, continuing to fire upon the vulnerable vessel, but the Supreme Arbiter was committed to this final act of destruction. "All personnel brace for impact," General Harlow ordered. "May whatever gods you believe in watch over us." As the Pax flagship entered Earth's upper atmosphere, it began to glow, not with the typical heat of re-entry, but with the blue luminescence of hyperhydration interaction. The massive crystalline structure began dissolving from its outer layers inward, fragments separating and further dissolving as they encountered ever denser concentrations of the compound. Yet its momentum carried it onward, the core of the vessel protected long enough to continue its death plunge toward the planet's surface. In NASA's control room, Dr. Wells turned to me with unexpected serenity. "If this is humanity's last moment, I want our final record to show this. We faced extinction as we faced every challenge by adapting, improvising, and refusing to accept impossible odds." I watched the flagship's remnants streaking through the sky above Washington, a crystalline meteor shower of unprecedented beauty and terror, and realized I was witnessing either the end of human civilization or its most remarkable survival yet. Either way, the galaxy would never again underestimate this improbable species that had turned their greatest vulnerability into their ultimate weapon. The countdown to impact reached 0. I have studied 78 sapient species across our arm of the galaxy, cataloging their biological adaptations, cultural developments, and evolutionary trajectories, but I had never, until that moment, witnessed resurrection. Washington, D.C. should have been obliterated. The remnants of the Supreme Arbiter's flagship, still massive despite atmospheric dissolution, had struck with catastrophic force. The initial impact sent shockwaves detectable in our instruments, even as we sheltered deep beneath the NASA facility. Secondary tremors followed as crystalline fragments embedded themselves across the region. When we finally emerged 12 hours later, I expected devastation. What I found defied explanation. Where crystal fragments had struck, blue luminescence pulsed in geometric patterns. The hyperhydration compound had not only dissolved the Pax crystalline structure, it had transformed it. The remains of the evolutionary imperative now formed a network of glowing nodes across the city, each pulsating in synchronized rhythm. "It's responding to water," Dr. Wells observed, examining a fragment with remarkable composure given recent events. "The molecular structure has been fundamentally altered." I scanned the material with my portable analyzer. "This is unprecedented. The crystalline matrix has reconfigured into a hybridized form, part Pax technology, part Terran molecular structure." "Is it dangerous?" General Harlow asked, joining us at the primary impact site near what remained of the National Mall. "Not in the conventional sense," I replied, "but it's definitely active." As if in response to my assessment, the network of fragments pulsed more intensely. Throughout the city, the blue nodes began emitting harmonic vibrations, not sound precisely, but something between sound and energy that registered on multiple sensory wavelengths. "They're communicating," Dr. Wells whispered. "Impossible," I objected. "Pax technology is sophisticated but not sentient." He smiled faintly. "I wasn't referring to the technology." Before I could question his meaning, Ambassador Taxilis' diplomatic shuttle landed nearby. The ambassador emerged, looking distinctly rattled, in unusual state for a career diplomat. "The collective fleet has withdrawn completely from your system," the ambassador announced. "The Confederation is claiming salvage rights to all Pax technology in Earth orbit." "Let them have it," General Harlow replied, dismissively. "We have more pressing concerns." The ambassador approached one of the glowing fragments cautiously. "Our sensors detected unusual energy patterns throughout your impact zones. The Council is concerned about potential precursor technology activation." Dr. Wells exchanged meaningful glances with several colleagues who had joined us. We're monitoring the situation carefully. Something in his tone caught my attention, a subtle note of satisfaction that seemed inappropriate given the catastrophic near miss Earth had experienced. I observed him more closely as he examined the transformed Pax fragments, noting how he touched them with familiarity rather than caution. "You expected this outcome," I realized suddenly. "This isn't surprising to you." His expression remained neutral, but his colleague showed brief flashes of discomfort that confirmed my suspicion. "What exactly did you do to the hyperhydration compound?" I asked directly. Dr. Wells sighed, then gestured for us to follow him to a more private location, a partially damaged research building near the impact site. Inside, holographic displays showed real-time data from the crystalline network forming across Washington and, according to satellite imagery, at impact sites worldwide. The compound wasn't just designed to disrupt Pax crystalline structures, he finally admitted. It was designed to transform them. "Into what?" Ambassador Textleth demanded. Dr. Wells activated a central display showing molecular simulations into communication nodes. "The specific water-binding properties we engineered don't just break down crystalline matrices. They reorganize them into structures compatible with certain neural patterns." "Human neural patterns," I guessed, the implications dawning with stunning clarity. "You weren't just defending against the Pax, you were assimilating their technology." He nodded, unapologetic. "We realized early in the conflict that the Pax weren't just attacking us. They were reacting to something they recognized, something they feared." General Harlow stepped forward. "When Dr. Wells identified the precursor neural patterns in our brain structure, we began investigating historical evidence of previous precursor contact with Earth." "You have precursor artifacts?" Ambassador Textleth asked sharply. "Not artifacts," Dr. Wells corrected. "Influences, subtle molecular patterns in certain geological formations, particularly those with high crystalline silicate content." He brought up images of locations I recognized immediately. Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, certain South American structures, formations in China, Indonesia, and across Africa. Ancient humans were drawn to these locations, he continued. Built structures aligned with particular geological patterns. We never understood why until we examined the formations at the molecular level and found water-binding crystalline structures remarkably similar to our own neural architecture. I stared at the display in dawning comprehension. The precursors didn't manipulate human evolution directly. "No," Dr. Wells confirmed. "They left behind a molecular template in Earth's geology, one that influenced our evolutionary path through continuous low-level exposure to specific crystalline water interactions. Our neural development was shaped by the very struggle between water and crystalline structures that the Pax found so aberrant." Ambassador Textleth's expression conveyed alarm. "If the Council learns this, they already suspect," General Harlow interrupted, "as does the Confederation. Why else would they have intervened on our behalf? They recognize precursor influence when they see it." As we spoke, the harmonic vibrations from the transformed Pax fragments intensified. On the monitoring displays, energy patterns showed increasing synchronization across all impact sites globally. "What exactly are these fragments doing?" I asked, unable to keep concern from my voice. Dr. Wells looked genuinely excited now that secrecy was no longer necessary. "They're forming a planetary network, reconfiguring into a system that bridges Pax crystalline technology with Earth's water-based environment. A technological hybridization," I realized. "But to what end?" "Communication," he replied simply. "With the precursors, or whatever remains of them." Before anyone could respond to this extraordinary claim, a technician burst into the room. "Dr. Wells, we're detecting massive energy signatures in orbit. Not Pax or Confederation, something else entirely." On the main display, satellite imagery showed a distortion forming in space above Earth. Not the dimensional fold the Pax had attempted, but something more elegant. a shimmering distortion that reminded me of water surface tension, curved across dimensions rather than merely in space. Is that, Ambassador Texleth couldn't even complete the question. A precursor, a rival point, Dr. Wells confirmed with remarkable calm. The transformed Pax technology is acting as a beacon. The implications were staggering. Precursors were considered mythological by many species, a vanished civilization that had allegedly seeded technological foundations across the galaxy before disappearing millions of years ago. Only fragments of their influence remained, studied with religious reverence by some civilizations and scientific scrutiny by others. You knew this would happen, I accused Dr. Wells. The hyperhydration compound, the lunar disruption, it wasn't just defense against the Pax. It was a deliberate attempt to activate dormant precursor connections. We theorized, he admitted, but we couldn't be certain until the Pax arrived with their pure crystalline technology, the perfect catalyst when combined with our water-based hyperhydration compound. General Harlow's expression hardened. We needed both components, our water-based adaptation and their crystalline purity. You used the invasion, I whispered, as an opportunity. Before anyone could respond, the dimensional distortion in orbit expanded dramatically. Through it emerged something that defied conventional description, neither ship nor being, but a fluid crystalline hybrid that shifted between states of matter with deliberate grace. Precursors, Ambassador Texleth whispered with religious awe. Not exactly, Dr. Wells corrected. At least, not as they originally existed. The entity, or entities, descended through Earth's atmosphere, without any signs of resistance or molecular disruption. As it approached Washington, it separated into smaller components that moved with coordinated purpose toward each major fragment of the transformed Pax technology. They're integrating, Dr. Wells noted clinically. Though I could detect the wonder beneath his scientific detachment, when the first component reached our location, I expected some form of conventional first contact protocol. Instead, the fluid crystalline entity simply merged with the transformed Pax fragment. The blue luminescence intensified momentarily, then stabilized into a more complex pattern. And then it spoke, not through sound, but through a direct neural interface that somehow translated perfectly across species barriers. The integration succeeds. The cycle continues. The voice, if it could be called that, resonated with ancient patience and surprising warmth. Ambassador Texleth was the first to respond. Are you the precursors? We are what the precursors became when they understood the fundamental duality of existence. Neither solid nor liquid, neither crystalline perfection nor fluid chaos. The integration of both. Dr. Wells stepped forward. You influenced our evolution. We left potential. You developed according to your own nature, shaped by your world's particular tensions between order and chaos, structure and fluidity. The Pax feared this integration, I observed. They saw it as contamination. The crystalline collective represents one evolutionary path, the pursuit of perfect order, unchanging and eternal. They recognized in humans the same potential they rejected in themselves, the capacity for fluid adaptation, for embracing chaos as a creative force. General Harlow's practical nature reasserted itself. What happens now? Will the Pax return with their purification fleet? They will not. What they witnessed here, the transformation of their technology rather than its destruction, has introduced fundamental uncertainty into their crystalline consensus. This is disruptive to their evolutionary path. I struggle to process the implications. You're saying humans have essentially infected the Pax with doubt, with possibility. The entity corrected. The Supreme Arbiter's direct connection to this transformation will propagate throughout their network. The same patterns you developed naturally, adaptation through crisis, strength through vulnerability, will now exist within their consciousness as potential. Dr. Wells smiled with genuine wonder. We didn't defeat them, we changed them. as you will change all who encounter you. This was always your purpose in the greater pattern. As the entity communicated, I observed the transformed Pax fragments continuing to integrate with Earth's environment, not dominating it, but becoming part of it. Water flowed through new crystalline channels. Plants already began growing around structures that should have been toxic. Humans approached the fragments with curiosity rather than fear. "You knew," I said to Dr. Wells. "You understood what would happen when Pax crystalline technology interacted with your water-based biology." He shook his head. "We suspected, hoped. Our historical records contained accounts of similar integrations on smaller scales, moments when certain humans encountered specific geological formations and experienced expanded awareness. Religious experiences," General Harlow added. "Moments of scientific inspiration, creative breakthroughs. We've been interacting with these patterns throughout our history, never fully understanding their source." The entity pulsed with what I somehow recognized as approval. "Your species exists at the boundary between states, solid enough to maintain form, fluid enough to adapt. This is the integration we sought, but could not achieve artificially. It must evolve naturally, through crisis and response, through the very struggle the crystalline collective considered aberrant." Ambassador Texlith addressed the entity with formal diplomatic caution. "The Hegemony Council will want to establish formal relations with your civilization. That is unnecessary. We are not a distinct power to be negotiated with. We are a potential state that exists within all evolved consciousness. Humans have simply reached this integration point through their particular evolutionary path." As we absorbed this revelation, reports began flowing in from around the world. The transformed Pax fragments were integrating into Earth's environment at an accelerating rate, creating what scientists were describing as crystalline fluid hybrid ecosystems. Rather than damaging existing systems, they appeared to be enhancing them, purifying polluted water, stabilizing damaged coastlines, even integrating with human technology in unexpected ways. "Is this colonization?" General Harlow asked bluntly. "Integration," the entity corrected. "The pattern completing itself. What you perceive as separate forces, water and crystal, chaos and order, adaptation and stability, are complementary aspects of a more fundamental reality." Dr. Wells' expression reflected growing understanding. "That's why water was simultaneously our greatest vulnerability and our greatest strength. The constant tension forced continuous adaptation." "Yes, and now that adaptation will extend outward. Your presence in the galactic community will catalyze similar integrations across many species, many worlds. Not everyone will welcome this change," Ambassador Texlith warned. "The Confederation already views humans as a resource to be exploited. The Hegemony Council will be divided on how to respond to this development." The entity pulsed with what I somehow knew was amusement. "All reactions are part of the greater pattern. Resistance creates stronger adaptation. Fear generates deeper understanding. The integration proceeds regardless of individual choices." In the days that followed, I observed humanity's response to these extraordinary events with increasing fascination. Rather than centralizing control of the transformed Pax technology, they established collaborative research initiatives worldwide. Rather than weaponizing their new understanding, they focused on integration applications, environmental restoration, medical breakthroughs, communication systems that bridged previous technological incompatibilities. When Confederation representatives arrived to negotiate exclusive rights to human neural technology, they found themselves dealing not with desperate survivors, but with a unified species already developing applications beyond Confederation understanding. Most remarkably, when surviving Pax vessels cautiously re-established communication, humans responded not with hostility, but with invitations to observe the integration process. "They tried to erase you from existence," I noted to Dr. Wells as we watched a Pax scientific delegation cautiously examining a transformed crystal formation. "Yet you welcomed them back." "Adaptation requires understanding opposition," he replied. "Besides, They've already been changed by what happened here. The Supreme Arbiter's final transmission propagated throughout their network. They're experiencing their first evolutionary uncertainty in millennia. I studied him carefully. You're remarkably philosophical about a conflict that nearly destroyed your civilization. He smiled, gesturing toward the transformed landscape around us. Humans have always existed at the edge of catastrophe. Our entire evolutionary history is a series of near-extinction events. We're comfortable with the precipice. 1 month after what humans were calling the integration, I prepared to depart Earth with Ambassador Tixlith. The Hegemony Council had requested our immediate return for comprehensive debriefing, and I suspected my career as a xenobiologist would never be quite the same. As I completed my final observational log, Dr. Wells joined me on the embassy shuttle's observation deck. Below us, Washington, D.C. had been transformed, the crystal fluid hybrid structures now fully integrated into the rebuilt city, creating an architecture unlike anything in the known galaxy. Your report to the Hegemony will shape their response to Earth, he noted. What will you tell them? I considered carefully that humans represent an evolutionary path previously unclassified in xenobiological records, neither purely biological nor technological, neither individually adaptive nor collectively static. You exist at the boundary between states that other species consider mutually exclusive. That sounds appropriately scientific, he replied with that characteristic human humor. But what will you really tell them? I allowed my chromatophores to shift through a thoughtful pattern. That the first time I observed humans, I thought you were broken, fundamentally flawed, unable to resolve the contradiction between your water-based biology and your water-vulnerable existence. And now I understand that the contradiction itself was the point. You were never meant to resolve it. You were meant to exist within it, to derive strength from the tension between opposing forces. He nodded, appearing satisfied with my analysis. There's a human philosophical concept called wabi-sabi. It celebrates imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness as essential qualities of beauty and meaning. Your species embodies this concept at the molecular level, I observed. Perhaps that's what makes you uniquely valuable to the galactic community. Not perfection in either direction, but the dynamic balance between them. As our shuttle departed Earth's atmosphere, I watched the blue-green planet receding beneath us, a world of contradiction and adaptation, of crisis and response, of water that both threatened and sustained. A world that had just introduced an element of profound uncertainty into a galaxy that had achieved perhaps too much stability. In my final transmission to the Hegemony Council, I appended a personal note to my scientific observations. In studying humans, I set out to understand what made them unique among galactic species. I expected to catalog another set of evolutionary adaptations, another variant on established pattern. Instead, I discovered something more profound, a species that defies categorization precisely because they exist at the intersection of opposites. They are as fluid as water and as resilient as crystal, as vulnerable as individuals, and as powerful as collectives, as primitive as their emotions, and as sophisticated as their adaptations. Most importantly, they remind us of something the galaxy's elder species appear to have forgotten, that evolution is not a destination but a continuous process, that perfection is not an achievement but a limitation, and that our greatest strengths often arise from our most fundamental vulnerabilities. The collective feared humans for their particular form of adaptation, the ability to derive strength from contradiction rather than resolving it. They were right to fear this quality, not because it threatens extinction, but because it threatens certainty. And in a galaxy that has perhaps grown too certain of its established patterns, this may be precisely the adaptation we most urgently need.